I'm very interested in social media as something that can be helpful in some ways to people, but can also be very destructive. I mean, you're very big on Instagram, and I spend too much time on Instagram, and I spend too much time on Twitter. And I would say that my Twitter voice is quite disconnected in some ways to how you are experiencing me now, I imagine, or how people might experience me face to face. And given what we said earlier about trying to find our true self and not straying from it, social media can be quite difficult in that way, can't it? Because it can take us away from our core, and it can project all sorts of things that actually, if we think about it, we might not be so pleased that we're projecting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a funny one, isn't it? I think over the course of my career, like Instagram just wasn't a thing. And now it is. And, you know, I get so many different comments or so many people messaging me, asking me, I've got this problem or I'm having this experience. And it's such a strange reality, feeling like you're in relationship with somebody who you're not in relationship with. It's a funny one, but it's also been an amazing tool for me to be able to connect with people who otherwise wouldn't have the opportunity to ask a clinician a question or whatever.
If it's misused, it takes us away from ourselves, but it takes us away from the present, doesn't it? And you were talking earlier about how important it is for mental health to be in the present, not exclusively. You're not saying abandon plans or don't be sensible about the future or completely ignore the past, but you want us to be in the present.
Yeah, I think it's just about being, connected. And I think it's about, with social media, again, it's a coping strategy, isn't it? I think thinking about why you're using it and how is it making you feel? You know, are you following people and looking at things that are making you feel inspired and motivated and good? Or are you using it as a kind of, oh, I don't know, like an anesthetic to kind of disconnect and zone out from your reality? So it's just being curious about these things. I don't spend much time on social media at all. I do my contributions, my work on it, and then I don't really engage in it anymore, other than to, respond to people's comments.
Tell us a little bit about future-proofing ourselves. And by that, it's probably not quite the right way of putting it, but future self-journaling, how that can help as a tool to enable better mental health.
So future self-journaling was told to me a few years ago by another clinician who was using it and was having really good results with it. And so I started doing it myself, and I just loved it because I struggled a lot with just free writing. So just general journaling I never connected with, but this felt really different. And it's basically a set of prompts that kind of keep you accountable with a bit of a plan for yourself. So something each month that you're wanting to challenge or work on. And then each day you give sort of 5 to 10 minutes focus on these different prompts to keep you on task, essentially. Working on this, how are you going to work on it? How can you be kinder to yourself? What can you do today to manifest that in your future? And it's so impactful, and it's been so successful as a tool with my clients that's why I included it in the book, because it just seemed like there was no reason not to. It just seemed like the simplest thing. And it's one of these tools that we don't even think about doing, or I certainly never thought about doing, that have the biggest impact. And it just shows, like, again, how you don't need kind of a clinical person to tell you these things. There's so much work you can be doing on this yourself to help you feel like you're progressing and making shifts in your own life.
One of the things that you want to convince us of in the book, and presumably that you talk to your clients about when you meet them, if that's the right word, is that we can and we will get better. That goes back a little bit to what you were saying much earlier in our conversation about belief that things can change. But you're convinced that we can find answers, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course. And I think faith exists on faith alone. If you don't believe it, it's not there. If you believe it, then it exists. So much of our lives are manifestations of what we believe to be true. That's what we're drawing into reality. I don't think we're reacting to our reality. I think our reality is a response to what we've pursued based on our belief systems.
We are so different that you find connecting links, that you find patterns, you find, as you say, this residual trauma that so many people experience. But we're all so different as well, aren't we? And so there's no one size fits all. You're trying to point us in a direction that you feel is helpful.
Yeah, I think this is why this is so beautiful for people, because we are encouraged to think that we are so different and that the world is so fractured. And in many ways that's true. But in many ways it's not true. We all want similar things. We all have similar goals, and we have the similar struggles, you know. The feeling anxious, for example, is something that so many people, no matter who you are, no matter where you live, no matter what your background is, you're struggling with, and you're struggling with it for similar reasons, even if the expression of that is different depending on where you're from and who you are. Yeah, on the courses that I run, you'd see like this kind of group of people come together who are just from entirely different backgrounds, totally different age groups, connecting, and it's amazing.
Just to be practical again for a second, if someone were to pick up your book, and again, there's no one size fits all, and we don't want people presumably to put pressure on themselves, but do you have a sort of basic idea of how long it would take someone with a mid-range issue, to put it like that, pick up your book, follow through the various exercises, the tools? How long would it take for them, do you think, to start to see improvement?
I think they would feel better just reading the book. I'm that confident about it. I've been doing this work for such a long time, and I know that when people hear this and people connect with it, it resonates with people really deeply. And just knowing that somebody understands a little bit of what you might be feeling or going through is so amazingly comforting. So I think just in that moment, people start to feel a bit better. And then people start to think, maybe this could be different. Maybe something could change. And that's an amazing feeling to have. And that can happen almost instantly.
I get the sense, though, that this isn't something that you sort of pick up, whether literally in the case of the book or metaphorically. You're fixed and you move on. I mean, of course, some people have mental health challenges that bubble up, and I imagine that, you know, if it's a one-off event, maybe they do properly recover. But for others, it's an ongoing experience, isn't it?
Do you know what? The book is an invitation to live in a different way. So it's not about reading something that fixes something. It's different. It's an invitation to live differently, and to pursue life differently. So that's something that you then commit to. But it's not a kind of, as I said before, a slog. It's more like stop swimming against the tide, and I'm showing you how to kind of go with the flow. And if you consistently do that, it will just feel easier and easier and easier. But sometimes it's hard to move away from what's familiar to us. There's resistance to that.
I want to weave in some questions from the audience. And for those watching, if you haven't yet asked a question, please do, and we'll try and get through as many as we can in our Q&A. Shanti says, do you think there's a strategy for dealing with these traumas that are different? Do you think they're different for different age groups? How does the book address the different strategies?
So, I mean, this is for adults, for sure. But no, the strategies would apply to anybody. I think what happens as we get a bit older is we get a little bit more entrenched in our ways and in our thinking, and we become a bit more resistant to change or new ideas. I think that's just partly what happens to us. And I think as well, if we've had treatment before or we've seen therapists before and things haven't worked for us, then we're resistant as well. And I think a lot of that is based on fear of things not changing.
One or two questions. Interesting. I know you say it's for adults, but just about children. I mean, we know that mental health is a thing for children also. And I suppose is there. I mean, Fiona puts it like this. She says, if the stories that you're told in childhood set your narrative, as to some extent, I think you suggest. But what should parents look out for to ensure kids are on the right track? And if you don't feel that's your area, by all means, we don't need to talk about it.
No, I love talking about this, and I have 2 children, so it's something I can relate to massively. I think one of the things that we do as parents, understandably, and I do it as myself, is we're so resistant to our children experiencing any sort of pain or distress, and we will go above and beyond to try and prevent that from happening. And sometimes what we neglect to do is to consider the tools that we need to give them to cope with those things when they do happen, because they will. And so I think I'll give you a kind of anecdote that I use a lot with parents, which is about when you go flying and you're having the kind of the talk at the beginning about your exits on the plane and where your life jacket is. And they tell you to put the life jacket on yourself before you put it on your child. And as a mum, my immediate instinct with that is like, of course I'm going to put it on my kid first. And then you think it through a little bit and you think, of course I need to put it on myself. Because if I'm not okay, then they're not okay. And I think it's about nurturing yourself and using that opportunity to model to your children self-care, to model vulnerability, to show them what it is to get it wrong sometimes, because otherwise what else are we setting them up for? And that's hard to do.
As you've just used the word nurture, I mean, how do we nurture our own inner child in all this?
That child part of us wants to be seen and heard. So it's about validating that part of ourselves. But that child part of us as well wants to play. It's that creative part of ourselves. And how often do we play? How often are you kicking your shoes off and dancing around your kitchen? Not often enough, for most of us. So that's how you nurture that part of yourself. I get my clients to play games, literally play games. I just sent Pass the Pigs to a client actually last week. I don't know if you've played that. It's kind of stupid, funny game, but I was like, go and play a game and have fun. Stop being so invested in being a serious grown up for a minute and just have a laugh. It's what we need.
Laughter is, I mean, it's a cure to a lot of things, isn't it?
Yeah.
Ruth says, and I should obviously stress, if people have mental health issues, that they should seek medical advice and assistance. Ruth says, reading the book is a good first step. What would you recommend next?
See what comes up for you. I think the path will be shown to you when you read the book. I think sometimes people put their book down and think, right, this is what I need to now work on. This is where I need to give myself a bit of extra nurture and attention. It's about tuning in with that well voice, and that will guide you. It will tell you the work to be done, always.
I've noticed that the vast majority of our questions are from women today, which isn't always the case. And I wonder whether you notice differences, generally speaking, in the approaches that men and women can take to their own mental health.
Women are more likely to show up and do work on their mental health. I think there's a real barrier for guys to be vulnerable, even more than any of us as human beings. I think that's hard, but I think it's particularly hard for men. I think moving away from how men are supposed to be perceived and how men are supposed to be strong and being able to brush things off and push through things, and the reality is that we're just setting up guys to really struggle with their emotions and make it hard for them to talk, make it hard for them to be vulnerable. And these are things that we all need to do. In the worst cases, scenarios of that, you see young men, particularly across the pond, doing pretty devastating things, and you don't see women doing that.
The truth is, you can be very physically strong like me. You could be 6'3" and 15 stone and lift 115 kg on the bench press or whatever, but you can still be vulnerable and you can still suffer from mental health. You can be resilient as well. We're not just one thing, are we? I mean, I could be incredibly resilient and tough and strong, and yet I needed a lot of help with my mental health in my life.
Do you know what? I think that's really true. And I think part of being strong is a blessing and a curse, because it sometimes means we tolerate things a lot longer than we should because we can. We're able to push through. I'm really resilient. And that meant that I survived things that, and kept going with things maybe longer than I should have done.
Talk, talk, talk. I mean, really, it's so important for people to talk, isn't it? Karen says, I'm curious what Emmy would recommend for someone, this is quite specific, who's dealing with two big life disappointments that feel beyond her control. So she's devastated at not having a life partner or love by her
Mm.
mid-50s, and she's tired of looking. And the real fear involved in a possible cancer recurrence. How,
Mm.
how do you want to move forward? How do you sort of establish a position where you want to move forward, and where do you find your hope, I think is what she's saying. Are there any real tips? She says she's a good problem solver, but she struggles with reconciling these two.
Yeah, that's hard. I think about, I mean, obviously it's difficult to comment really specifically on somebody's um, circumstances, but I think thinking about reevaluating how you're pursuing life, and letting go potentially of this dream that you had to meet somebody, and then being at that age is painful, but giving yourself permission to grieve that and feel that. And then thinking about how you want to pursue life going forward. What other regrets do you have? What else do you wish you'd done? Because that won't be it. There'll be other things too. And there's some of these things aren't in your control. That's true, they're not, but some of them will be. What language did you want to learn? Did you want piano lessons? What did you want to do? What did you want to do when you were a little kid? Can you give yourself permission to do that now? Because those things might be an option for you, and they might give you a bit of hope.
Developing a hinterland, developing passions, and it's never too late, is it? Because the smallest things. I was standing in this great expanse of English countryside yesterday, and I don't know, lots of square miles of it, and the sun was setting. It was just me and a lovely couple from some other part of Sussex were there as well, and we took great pleasure in seeing birds that most people haven't heard of, and being there when the sun was setting. But that's
Mm-hmm.
available to most of us.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need a partner to do that.
Mm-hmm.
You can
Yeah.
go and experience these things on your own. So, as you say, lots of stuff is not in our control, but some of it is.
Yeah. Some of it is. Yeah.
This anonymous attendee says, "How do I protect myself and my family from a forthcoming family trauma? A very ill family member." It's actually a very interesting question. If we step away perhaps from the specifics, like, can you sort of future-proof yourself, to use the phrase I used earlier? Can you anticipate the possibility of trauma or the likelihood of trauma and somehow fortify yourself, or somehow put yourself in the best position to cope with it when it happens?
Yeah, you can. I think for a lot of us, we can predict difficult situations before we're in them. Families are classic. Quite often people will brace before they go into certain family situations because they're, waiting for that comment or waiting to be asked those questions, whatever it is. So I think boundaries are your friend here, basically. Putting in boundaries about how much yourself you're willing to share, how much time you're willing to give, thinking about how much you're doing out of duty and how much you're doing because you want to, how much is you're concerned about managing everybody else's feelings, trying to control how other people perceive you, and really asking yourself some of those questions can help you put boundaries in that can make those situations a lot easier to manage and deal with.
Just finished by reading this message saying, "Thanks both, nurture and kindness. So important. Lovely reminder of the things we need to do, but can be easy not to or have forgotten." So I've just bought your book, Emmy, while listening. Looking forward to getting back on track. Emmy, it's lovely to talk to you.
Yeah, you too.
And an unusual way to spend a rainy Friday evening in late May, but really, really interesting. And your book, as we've said all along, is available. Find Your True Voice. I hope you've kind of been able to get across some of the core messages, but there's loads more in there.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and thanks everybody for sharing the space.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. And you can find Emmy on Instagram, and you can find me on Instagram and Twitter, and Emmy on Twitter as well, in case you want to spend that little bit more time. Perhaps you shouldn't. Thank you so much to everybody for joining us at How To Academy. Thank you to Emmy particularly. Thank you to Esme for producing it. Stay well, everyone. Stay safe. Have a wonderful bank holiday weekend.